Okay, I think we will start. Thank you so much for all of you for joining during your lunchtime, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Before that, let me introduce myself for people who don't know me. I'm Padmini Janaki. This is part of the broadcast webinar series, which is a more of a product series. 15 days of whole webinars, and today is day 5. And today we have Savitha Ajithraj today with us. It's a pleasure inviting her because she's been through this journey. She's been, as a colleague, as a friend who has seen all this from where it started. It's such a pleasure inviting her today. And Savitha Ajithraj, of course, senior product manager at PayPal, and also she has been running a lot of initiatives like advancing women in product, which focus more about product management in women, and a lot of other diversity and inclusion programs too. Thank you, Savitha. All yours.
Hey, thank you, Padmini, for the opportunity. Thanks, first of all, both you and the entire team podcast to find creative ways to still keep the learning despite the COVID situation. So I hope everyone who has joined is doing safe and are taking the time to learn new stuff. So that's great. A little bit about myself on terms of product management. I've been doing, like Padmini said, for a decade now. I've had the pleasure to work with large companies like eBay and PayPal, where I call it more of an enterprise product management. I've also had the fortune to work with, Roof and Floor and a few other small startups, which gives me both the consumer side experience as well as the startup experience. And when we were talking about the topic on how I could contribute to this forum, we debated a little bit on the title. Should we call it consumer versus enterprise or B2C versus B2B? I think the nomenclature doesn't really matter much. It's more about understanding the fundamentals, and based on the nature you are, how do you tween your product strategy according to that. So I'll try to do some justice to this topic based on my experience, but like everybody else, I'm also learning in this journey. So looking forward to your questions and thoughts so that we all can, emerge better after this COVID situation and become better product managers. So with that, I'll just want to see if everybody can hear me fine and also see my screen. Padmini or one of the moderator, if you can confirm.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. Okay, so intentionally, I'm not using any kind of presentation mode. I just want, given this is a 5-minute conversation, I'll try to go into some basics, right? And using what I call as a mind map approach. Let's see. This was not the intent. All right, yeah. I think the fundamentals, right, as a product person, doesn't change whether you are working for a B2C setup or a B2B setup. I know that's not the core of this session, so I would not take a lot of time in this specific area, but it's always good to start with this and then apply the nuances that comes with B2C or B2B approach. You need to know your customer, who is actually using your product, who is buying your product, and that research is fundamental to start developing a better understanding of what their life is and how your experiences fit into their life. You also need to understand what their customer needs are and how are they different from their desire. A customer might be desiring for something else, but the needs would be something else. So how do you really differentiate between the needs and the wants is something that is required in both B2C and a B2B setup. Similarly, understanding the value chain, right? who are the various players in the ecosystem and who is actually contributing to that value and how are they contributing to the value, so that eventually when somebody is buying, gets their ROI. And that takes you to a very quantitative angle to understanding your product and business KPIs. Product without having a good grip on business KPIs and product KPIs is like, trying to sell something without even understanding why someone would sell it, trying to build your product strategy without even understanding in which stage of product development you are, and what is the maturity, and trying to be all over. So, sorry. Okay. So this is something that is required irrespective of whether you're working for a consumer product or an enterprise product. So let's take some examples, right? If you're looking for a company like Myntra or Flipkart, who are your users and what do they need, right? What have you done some research? If not, you need to spend some time doing that research and getting into that depth of it. Similarly, you could be working for a company like Microsoft or SAP, which play more in the enterprise world. So how is the packaging done? Now let's take this current example of the COVID situation, right? All of a sudden, Microsoft Teams would start seeing a lot more adoption or products like Zoom in this era. Does that mean that this will stop the moment people go back to working from office, or is there a play that I can see now that people are forced to use these products in these times? How can I sustain that kind of adoption and ensure that it fits into the overall thinking of selling as well? So all of these are important, irrespective of whether you're working to a B2C or a B2B, or there's no way to escape from it. So that's the primary point I wanted to make to ensure that people understand this part. So if there are no questions, I'll go into the depth of, okay, so if I do all of this as a product manager, is it enough to get the best out of my customers? Or do I need to tweak furthermore when it comes to actually delivering in the space I am in? So let's talk a little bit about the B2C world and then compare that world with the B2B world. So here, actually speaking, in the B2C world, it is very important as a product manager, while you work with your technical team, also have a very healthy partnership with your UX team, so that ultimately when you're delivering these products, they are not just robust from a technology standpoint, but they are also easy to use and easy to learn. So, let's take again the example of Zoom. Today is probably my first experience, and all I spent was 5 minutes to understand this particular product. And if I have to deliver this Zoom experiences to millions of users, including students and teachers now who are all getting tuned to learning online, they should be also be able to use my product if I was a Zoom product manager, right? Which means I cannot have a 5-pager of how to use guide where I expect a third grade student to read all of it and then see how to use my product, right? So it has to be very simple, user-friendly, focused. And as a product manager, you need to spend even your time with the UX team. And when you're developing solutions, spending that time in validating that it is UX friendly, right? And that doesn't come just because I, as a product manager, find it easy to use, or my tech team finds it easy to use, or my design team. It has to be validated from your end users. So you need to spend time in identifying who the end users are and doing some usability testing to ensure that they also comprehend it the same way as you do. So that's something I would say a lot of focus is required when you're actually a product manager for a B2C kind of a setup. Now comes the second part, of the customers, right? What are the volumes that you're talking about? Of course, it depends on the segment and the geography you're catering to, but in general, it's more about large scale approach. I would not have a B2C product just for 10 users or 10 customers, right? So even from a technology standpoint and from a platform standpoint, my product should be able to cater to millions of users globally, or in a specific area such as European or North America or APAC, if there is a cultural aspect of it involved. You may take a cloud approach. It's not necessary or mandatory, but that can help you get, further scale. If you suddenly see a spike in your product adoption, and you don't want your tech team to grapple with all of the aspects of architecture, if suddenly you see a spike. So again, that's more getting into the implementation or the technical strategy. But as a customer or as a product manager, you should be aware of these technologies available, so that if you're a startup and if you want to build something right the first time, you consider these options along with your tech team. Now, a product is not just sold in the vacuum, right? It's not like one-time sell and then you forget about the user. There is also a servicing part that comes into it. The servicing could be to the consumer or to the other stakeholders in that community who is actually paying ultimately for you. So for example, let's take a Google use case, right? Google AdWords. I may not be doing any servicing to the consumers who are using day in and day out Google for, finding searches online. But in that model, my business user could be the marketing guy or the digital marketing guy who is actually spending on these AdWords. So if they have a query, can they self-serve themselves rather than, waiting for a human support? So it comes more from a support angle. When you build something, when you're building new features or new initiatives, you don't just end with launching it, right? You need to, before launch, you need to prepare all the collaterals that are required so that your end users can go through help documents if they have to, and they can do so by themselves. So first time setup could be something that I could just browse a one pager rather than expecting, to talk to a human purely from a scale standpoint, right? If you're talking about millions of consumers who are going to use your product. They are usually focused on task completion or conversion. So again, let's take an example of Myntra or Flipkart. The primary KPI would be, how do I help the consumer buy their product with ease, right? And how can I maximize the conversions? In terms of monetization, they tend to focus on having a better user engagement, return user engagement, and also good spread of word of mouth, so that they can get more and more customers in a viral way rather than just focusing on spending on advertisement. So these are the nuances that one should consider, or one is likely to consider if they are working for a B2C. So I'll pause here to see if there are any questions. If not, I will, we can reserve the questions till the end and move to the B2B context. Okay, so since I'm sharing the screen, I can't see the question. So I'll probably move into the B2B section now.
Yeah, Savitha, I think you can go ahead with the session. And we do have questions in the chat. Let's take that once the session is done.
Okay, sounds good, Padmini. All right. Now, generally, it's easy to understand the B2C world because we are ourselves, consumers of these products. But when you start working for the B2B side, unless you have owned the business yourself, sometimes it's difficult to empathize this without doing further more research or spending actual time with, building B2B products. So these are a few things that I learned, I will say, the hard way because I don't own a business myself, though my dad does, but he had done it in the age when there was no digital world, right? Everything was done manually, and that experience didn't necessarily enlighten me in that journey. So I learned this both from my experiences with eBay, PayPal, as well as how Roof and Floor was actually getting into the advertisement market from the real estate developers. So again, depends on which stage you are, but sometimes I can say these things, if you knew it right, even in the beginning, in the inception itself of your MVP, you would consider it so that you don't have to rebuild everything once you start scaling. So you can build to scale in the beginning as well. So that I would say is a couple of items. I would call it as API driven approach. So API is nothing but application programming interfaces. So everything that you could do online on, say, Myntra or Flipkart, if eventually you want to, have that availability on Flipkart mobile, you could say that I would rebuild everything and do something as Flipkart Lite version, or I would actually keep that in mind in the beginning and build it the API route so that the UX, which is built on top of these APIs, can be built for my flipkart.com as on mobile app, as well as the other business users who would be wanting to consume these services, but they would like to consume it in their own world. So let's take a deeper example, right? Now, think of the sellers of Flipkart or any e-commerce website. They would have a variety of sellers. The sellers could be casual sellers, where you and I could be selling few items at a very small scale, or I could have few professional sellers who are actually selling at a medium volume size, or I could even have enterprise sellers like Nike or Lenovo, who want to sell the laptops and shoes directly on Flipkart without getting into any intermediate. Now, if you are trying to work with these B2B customers, you will realize that Nike, being an enterprise company, or even Microsoft or Lenovo, they would prefer their teammates adding up the stock keeping units in their software, which could be SAP CRM or SAP inventory management. So, and their end users, which could be, support staff, would also be using the SAP CRM tools and inventory management tools. And all of it is connected to their warehouses in terms of whenever the supply is available, not available. They would not expect that all of this, someone will manually go to Flipkart seller site and manage it, which means they want to have their experiences integrated well into their ecosystem or work system. And one way to make that happen is opening up all your Flipkart selling experiences as public APIs, documenting it on your developer portal, and making it available to these enterprise customers. They will also have developers in-house, or they might even float an RFP to get a team of developers to build that integration on top of it, which means my product now suddenly expands to not just the end business users, which could be the sellers, but it's also now expanding to a community called developer community. And they tend to prefer everything in terms of the technical documentation available in a self-serve way. So I'll have to cater to that part if I start thinking about expanding into the B2B arena. Similarly, when it comes to managing these customers, right? Generally, they are not in millions because there's only so many enterprise companies out there. They could be in thousands as your maximum potential, and you might choose to just serve 10 of them, right? You might think that with just serving 10 customers, I am getting enough ROI. Why I choose 10 over thousands? Because I can really get into a deeper conversation with these customers, really sell, keep them happy so that they can never leave me, right? And which means as a product manager, I need to be sensitive in terms of um, the communication style that I have with these customers. Of course, you will have sales team, again, depending on whether you're a startup or a mid-size. You might even have a dedicated sales force to take care of their needs to do the day in and day out interactions. But eventually, as a product manager, you should be spending some time in either the sales conversations or support conversations to really understand how to ensure that these customers don't leave you. Because sometimes just one customer leaving you could mean that, you know, your 40% of your revenue is gone. That could be the criticality of these enterprise customers. So your SLAs in terms of, you know, how your team responds to bugs, issues, they need not be like, you know, the standard SLA. They could be a far more stringent SLA, and you need to work with your tech team to ensure that they get that seriousness as well. You can't treat all the customers alike and say, you know, the standard 10-day SLA would work for these customers. Generally, it doesn't. They expect everything to be treated as P1, not because the severity of the issue is that high, but the criticality of the impact on the relationship of these customers could eventually lead up to loss of business. So as a product manager, if you're working in a B2B setup, you need to, you know, build your time schedule to allow, you know, to look into these issues and not just leave it to the support team to take care of it. While the support team can do the basic triaging and stuff like that, when you start seeing threads of similar issues coming from different enterprise customers, then probably it's also a signal to adjust your roadmap and see if that can be solved in a more product optimization rather than just going the support route. Yes, so in B2B, you can afford to have a manual or a human approach depending on the lifetime value of these customers and how much revenue you're generating out of these customers, than just simply resorting to a tech solution where you just put out a help center. On top of it, you can, you know, afford to have, or your customers, your enterprise customers will prefer to have the human approach to their servicing issues. In terms of sales, you know, in the consumer world, the sale could happen in few seconds, but in the enterprise world or the B2B world, generally it's if not months, at least few weeks, where some companies float their RFPs and then decide which product to use. So there's a deliberate exercise in terms of the evaluation. And the reason why as a PM you need to be aware is if there's something that's coming up as a new RFP, and if there's a gap in your product, which could end up as a competitive disadvantage, you might want to react much faster than realizing it after losing some of these sales to those customers. Because once they've got into it, it's very difficult to change as well. So once I've decided as a customer, I will go with product X versus Y, you know, it will be almost, you know, unless the product X makes a big blunder, it will be very difficult for the sales team in product Y to actually go back to that customer and really make a case to switch. It also depends on the switching costs, but generally in the enterprise cycle, the switching cost is much higher because of the long sales cycle, the RFP process involved, and so on and so forth. In terms of monetization, it's more relationship driven, where you really understand 360-degree of that customer and look at upsell and cross-sell opportunities to get the maximum, and ensuring that first you retain the customer, and second you increase beyond the basic features as well. So you also think about how to move, if they're already in, say, silver plan, how do you move them to gold plan or platinum plan, right? Or whatever that equivalent is. It obviously depends on the subscription model. There are various other aspects of it that comes into the picture, which I've deliberately not gone to it because this is just a 45-minute session. And I thought, first 25 minutes, I'll talk about this. And then based on the questions that you have, we can apply those angles and see how to leverage. So we're almost at 25 minutes. And before we go into Q&A, I just want to leave one thought with all of you in terms of, we've been talking at various different places, this concept of good to great, right? Now, a good PM would definitely do justice to this if he's a B2C PM. And obviously this, right? You just cannot do away with fundamentals. Good B2B PM will also do justice to this part of it, but a great PM will build the product in such a way that the product can serve B2C and B2B aspects, and become a great and deliver a great product. So that's why you see very few companies and very few product managers who qualify as a great PM, because to do all three of it, which means that you're actually multitasking like crazy. You're shifting your focus from strategy to execution every 2 hours, if not every 2 days. You move from a UX conversation to an API conversation, which means a totally different language that you speak. And very few are actually able to do justice both, right? You generally have a tendency to become specialized in this area or in this area, which means you can still survive and you can be still doing justice as a good product manager. But if you even take some examples, like, which I could say I get inspiration from, one example would be from Indian ecosystem, Freshdesk. I think they have applied the B2B mindset with the B2C approach, which means I can sell an enterprise software which has an amazing UX. If you compare the UX of SAP software products and Freshdesk products, you will see there's a drastic difference in their approach, which means they've actually, in a way, in the hindsight, applied all these in this framework, right? Because eventually this is used by business companies. And since they have catered to the employees of these business companies who in their daily life use a lot of B2C products, and they've got used to that user experience, they expect that level of intelligence in B2B setup as well. Similarly, another example that I can think of is probably Microsoft, right? When you think of Microsoft and Google, again, Google comes as, a UX focused company. Microsoft is not necessarily completely there. But if you see in the last few years, especially after Satya Nadella took over the company, right? How they have changed their whole strategy rather than just being serving their own suite, which means if it's an Excel, it works fantastic on Windows, but if it doesn't work on the other cross platforms that my users are used to, then it's not great, which means they have to rethink their entire user experience and not assume that all the employees are just using Windows, right? They might be using Mac. They're still not there, right? They're still, but they are probably much better than what they were a few years ago. So, so I would say Microsoft, in my opinion, is still, in that transition phase from good to great, but they are making the right moves there by applying all of these approaches while they're still serving the B2B segment. Another example, which I would like to share from my personal experience with PayPal, is we were known to be a simple button, which can be easy for any seller, casual seller to integrate on their website. But when it came to API integration, it became almost a nightmare. And you'll see a lot of feedback of developers where they compare PayPal with Stripe, and Stripe really comes out strong. But in the last few years, we've consciously spent a lot of time in overhauling that API experience and coupled with the Braintree integration advantages, and we're getting there. So many companies are moving from good to great, and if they really have to do a great job, which also starts with the product manager doing a great job, they'll have to encompass all of this into their thinking from a hard skills standpoint, coupled with other soft skills, which is not the focus of this conversation. So I'll keep that as out of scope. So with that, I think that was something I thought I share in a very succinct way. And I hope this visualization makes that point as well. And now probably take over a few questions.
Sure. Are you able to see the questions, Savitha?
So I see group chat. That's where
we do have a lot of questions. You can pick 2 questions and answer them. Of course, there are quite a lot where people can contact you on LinkedIn and get the answers, but you can pick to answer 2 of these questions.
Okay, just give me a couple of minutes. Okay. Okay, all are great questions, but probably I'll pick up the one on the prioritization as the first question, right? And probably I should have added this as one other aspect in the mind map as well. So yes, it's hard. So the question is, thanks for your insights. I'm super curious how you think of linking KPIs to prioritization of features, especially because it's harder to justify with an immediate revenue lift. Yeah. So one question that you need to ask yourself is, at what stage of your product maturity you are in, and what is your company's priority for the next 1 year? If your company as a priority is, or your business is trying to penetrate really hard into few enterprise customers, then it may be a need for you to deliver those needs, even though the revenue lift from those customers will come only down the line, right? So for example, they might be asking for a particular feature, which could be about, which could at the beginning look like a very specific customization. But generally what I do in those situations is validate with my business teams whether that particular sales lead is really high in terms of qualification. Many times your sales team will be talking to customers or leads which are not qualified enough. They could be distracting you, right? So work very closely with your business partners to qualify the lead. Once the lead has been qualified, what I do in those cases, or I would recommend, is having actually a direct call or face-to-face interaction, depending on the proximity with that customer, and go back to the fundamentals, right? Understanding the need of the customer. What they are stating as a feature is not actually what they want. They want to accomplish something with that feature. Now, once you've understood that pretty well, if you haven't got it right in the first conversation, don't hesitate to have follow-up. Of course, it depends on the relationship that you build with the sales team and with the customer, and the sales team, what sales team builds relationship with the customer as well. Those nuances will play into the, which, in the amount of time you can get from the customer. But if you can get that time, spend that time to go back to understand what is the need that they are asking, than just looking at what is the feature they're asking. Once you've understood that need, go back with your other customers, or at least the Salesforce team, and see if that is something that is actually true for others as well. And then you will realize that what they're asking is actually on the behalf of the rest of the community. They have just been more vocal than others. And if you think that is pretty much a need for everyone, it's just a few customers have been vocal, then and what will they get out of it? If you can convert that into a quantifiable number, eventually that will make up for the revenue lift or at least stickiness to your product. So not sure if that was a straightforward answer you should answer without getting into the specifics. If I have a specific scenario, I can go more into that. Yeah. I think that question was from Shashank, so probably Shashank can confirm here. Okay, all right. The next question which I would like to talk about is the legal aspects of your product, right? Okay, I think if your company and product is very particular about brand sensitivity, I think it's very important that you get the legal sign off before you even launch your product. Because sometimes what happens is, say if you're penetrating into the new market and you are not necessarily aware of the cultural and the legal aspects of that new market, right? Unless you yourself have been in that new market. So for example, if I'm launching something in France, I don't necessarily know what is the legal framework there. Neither do I know the cultural aspects of the French people. Now, in that place, what I would do is I would ensure that as a product manager and my team, which includes the UX designer and tech lead, spend some time in understanding the cultural nuances as well as the legal nuances. In fact, legal takes precedence over cultural. Otherwise, what would end up is you would launch something without having appropriate legal sign-offs, only to realize that not only you have to shut down the market or your product in France, sometimes the implications could be so higher in the numbers that it could actually turn down your business completely, right? Of course, if you're a biggie one, maybe it will just show up as a loss in your financials and not necessarily force you to shut down. But it's very important. Once you've lost your brand reputation, it's very difficult to make up for it, and you need to ensure whatever you're talking as a promise to your customer is also available in your legal terms and conditions as well. So as a PM, at least I spend, I call this as probably the most difficult part to work with the legal teams across the world when you're working for global launches. But you have to have that patience to listen to them, to see what their legal challenges are, and ensure that you're not violating those terms and conditions. And sometimes it could even slow down your launches. If your company does user agreement changes only twice a year, then those launches will be restricted to those 2 timeframes. But in my opinion, I think that's the right thing to do in terms of sustainability, right? You may do 5 launches in a year with a quick speed, but the 6th launch will actually, force you to shut down your business. So you rather take those 5 ones in a slow manner so that the 6th one adds up to it and does not go against the legal framework or the brand framework. So that would be my recommendation. And that's why the product is at the center of everything, right? You work with UX, you work with tech, you work with legal, you work with sales and all of this. And that's why this job is tough and doing justice to everyone from, ensuring you say no in the right way. And that generally means spending a lot of time with people, right? That's what I've realized the hard way. And that's why being a great PM is not easy. So that's the price you pay. But with the satisfaction you get is definitely worthwhile. So I think I would take those 2 questions. B2B, if there's time for one more, maybe I can take one more. Padmini?
You can take one more question.
Yeah. So this is around KPIs, right? So how do you explain B2B KPIs versus the B2C? So I think I did touch about it, right? So generally in a consumer product, you just don't care about the conversion. You also care about the engagement. especially, the return user engagement. So it's not good. I mean, you can solve a guest checkout problem and do the first time sale quickly, but what is the probability that they will come back to you? And if they don't come back to you, is that really okay with your business? Because the cost of acquiring a new customer is generally much higher than the cost of retaining a customer. And if your product, in terms of getting few metrics out, getting few lift in the conversion, has decided to take that short-term play, which may be okay. It could be again a business and a product decision. But sometimes you may realize that now your company is trying to scale and they want to scale with sustainability, which means you can't assume a lot of dollars being spent on acquisitions, and you want to get your business with retention. So those are the metrics that would actually matter for B2C KPIs. For B2B, I actually would go one step further. I would identify the users of these B2B and see what matters to them. Because if I'm serving a business, eventually it's still a human who is using that product, right? It could be an employee or a contractor in that B2B setup who's using my product. Have I made their life easy? Have I made their jobs? So they might have few jobs to do. So are they spending a lot of time in completing these jobs? Or can I make it easy for them so that they can complete it faster and have more productivity? So their KPIs become my KPIs in a way, so that I help them do better business. So that's the angle I would take for a B2B product. Within that, if you want to go further deep, like if you have APIs, what's your API adoption? Are you getting new type of customers using your APIs? Are you getting new use cases launched using APIs, and so on and so forth? So there's a lot that you can go, and that's a topic in itself. But that would be my short answer to this question. So with that, I think we're pretty much on time. And once again, thank you, Padmini and team, for this opportunity. Thank you all for being a wonderful audience. Stay safe. And yeah, with that, I'll probably hand it over back to Padmini.
Yeah, thank you so much, Savitha. This session was really good. Though we were not able to cover too many things like in 40 minutes, 45 minutes, definitely a very good high-level introduction into B2C versus B2B, and it was really insightful. And for people who asked the questions, but we do not have much time to really answer now, feel free to connect with Savitha on LinkedIn, or you can also send it to us where we can connect with Savitha and get it answered. We will try to. Some of you asked me about the recording privately. We have recorded these sessions, but it might take a little time for us to really upload it on YouTube. It's going to take at least 2-3 weeks from now on, but it will be available on YouTube. With that said, tomorrow we have a session by Nathan from ChargeBee about strategy, product strategy. Feel free to join by 2 o'clock. Register it at the broadcast LinkedIn page. For now, let's take a quick screenshot feed types. So I would suggest you to switch on your camera if that's possible with you. So we'll take a quick picture and we will close it there. Wow, it's so nice. Hi, Shashank, and hi, Anuradha. Hi, Pratyusha. Anand. Okay, I'm going to consider the others are not in a zone where they can switch on the camera. So let me just take a picture quickly. Thank you so much. Thanks for being an amazing audience. Join us also tomorrow. It's just day 5. So we have 10 more days. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.